the study that I have conducted was focusing more on climate governance. And as you know that, as all of you are aware that, we have been felt the effect of the climate change here in Somaliland. It is practical and actually, and there's so many ways that you can actually try to focus on combating the climate change. One of the important aspects is the governance. So I think the study was just looking at the governance, how climate governance mechanisms here in Somaliland, and what are the gaps that exist in for example, like in climate governance and all of this one. And particularly, for example, we were focusing more, for example, like the policy-related gaps that actually, for example, like we are having here. And of course, when you look at, most of the aims of the study was, number one, to address by mapping the existing policies, and then also looking at possible pathways for starting to address these gaps. So the more focusing on what has been existing in terms for the policies and what and exactly another strategy and the legal framework is. And so these are the area. We also look at for example, like we also look at other aspects of the governance in terms for resource-wise, and for example, like another coordination and coordination structures and other important elements that can be part and parcel of the governance. So before I just go the findings of the study, this map shows the projected temperature increase in Horn of Africa. And when you see it, this shows that we actually have felt the impact of the climate change, and we're also expected to also severely be affected by the climate change in the coming decades, actually. So I think so that involves us. That's a high need to look at ways of actually getting prepared of this, what we call it, the projected climate change effect here in Somaliland. And that also informs us the necessary policy mechanisms and also to be also put in place. So this is also an important. Secondly, one of the key findings that we have found out is including, number one, the gaps in terms of policy framework. We have found out that there are a number of gaps in terms of policy framework. Of course, there are policies that are at draft level, and there are also other policies that have been developed by the other relevant institutions. So we try first to map all the existing policy. We went to the Ministry of Agriculture, we went to the Ministry of the Livestock, we went to the Ministry of Water, and all the relevant government agencies, and we have looked and studied the existing policies and regulatory frameworks. We found out there are a number of the policies that have been in place, but some of them have not been operationalized. Some of the important policies have not been developed by some of the ministries. So I think, so that's also we have found out. Some of them are developed but not operationalized and implemented by the relevant governments. Others actually have not yet been developed by the government agencies. So these are also, you look at it. Some of them are draft level. When you actually look and study, you find out that it has been developed 5 years ago and it is at draft level. So this also, for example, like gaps in terms for policy actually. We also look out in terms for governance, we also look at the resource-wise. So dealing the climate change effects, what resource that we have it. In terms for, when you look at the fiscal budget of Somaliland, for example, like 1.6% are allocated for environmental issues or environmental programs here in Somaliland, meaning that the sector is underfunded or less supported by the public resource, by the fiscal resource of the government of Somaliland, comparing to the other sectors actually. So this is also an element as part of the governance that also impacted, for example, like that also have a gap. We also look at, for example, like in terms for access to the climate finance. Is Somaliland accessing the climate finance? Of course, we know that there are tremendous climate funds that are available across the globe, but Somaliland is not having the opportunity to what we call it, to access the climate funds due to number of factors, number of circumstantial factors, including the lack of recognition, and the way that, of course, there could be other ways that can be engaged with that Somaliland government can engage with the donors to access the climate funds, but also the recognition aspect and not giving special, a separate focus on Somaliland case is also has embedded the Somaliland not to access the resources that have been required to deal with the climate change. The other aspect that we have also looked at the evidence-based data. When you want to actually when you want to combat the climate change or do anything, in a normal state they say, meaning that when you have the accurate information data, you will be able to actually put in place your initiatives and your measures so that you can actually combat, for example, climate change or another issue. So we also found out that there is a lack of evidence-based data here in Somaliland, particularly in climate. The BAC is now trying to also establish some of the baseline of the climate-related information. These are good initiatives that we can move forward, but also apart from this one, there's also very limited data available in terms for example, like climate change and associated factors and all of this one. So this is also a gap in terms for, and that also impacts the decisions to be taken, by the government and relevant stakeholders, because of all the decisions, it just meaning that the decisions are not always based on evidence-based data, which also have its own implications in time. And secondly, we found out that there is a lack or limited decentralization of the climate policies, meaning that some of the existing policies are being developed at central level, but not yet decentralized to the regions and the districts. This is also a gap that also have been found out. And the other thing is, for example, most of the implementation takes place at the regional and the district level. At the national level, it's more on policy and coordination, meaning that where the actual impacts on actual pragmatic activities have to be taken, which is the regional and the district level, we're less engaged So this also have an impact in terms for effectiveness of this climate governance and all mechanisms that are in place. The other thing that's also important is the consultation and stakeholder participation. Meaning, the consultation, we look at, the issue of the climate change has a different stakeholders. It has stakeholders at community level. It has all the stakeholders at, for example, stakeholders at national level and stakeholders at donor and other international community. Meaning that, for example, in all, there's adequate consultation with the important stakeholders, particularly the communities, and during, for example, policy development process and all of this one, they were less engaged, and this also has the implications in future when actually these policies are being trying to maybe implement. So this also having a important gap we also found out. So this also shows how the coordination, there's a poor coordination among government stakeholders. Particularly, there is a lack of inter-coordination structures that are aimed to actually coordinate with the climate-related activities, meaning that the issue for climate change is not mainstreaming across different sectors. So this graph shows that how actually the production was being going down, and most of the time actually this is attributed to maybe climate-related factors. However, this also involves us the need to mainstream the climate change into the production sectors. And it shows that how it is very highly important to maybe look how these climate change issues can be also coordinated and mainstreamed into different production or into different sectors. So this is a very important area that we look at. We also look at the participatory approach that can be put in place. Of course, when we look at the governance, how the communities and the private sectors and the government can work together in thoroughly improving, for example, like the issues of climate change governance. We also found out that we need to make, for example, like invest more in climate change adaptation. The private sector has to also come in. They now actually, they can also come in ways that, for example, like they can collaborate with the pastoralists. Because of course now there are livestock traders that normally takes to the livestock to the that export the livestock. But however, there's a less actually return to the pastoralist, and you know, they go to the community, and they also buy and, for example, like and get livestock from them, but not developmental projects and other activities are being implemented by the private. So we also look at the areas of the investing climate change adaptation. We also look at the government subsidy to the private sector. Government also encourage to, for example, like to encourage to the private sector to also invest in more, for example, in the issues of climate change adaptation. We also look at the important aspect, including the livestock insurance, meaning that is a ways that, for example, like we can look at ways that the pastoralist can be insured of the losses in terms for the livestock when the shocks and the climate-related shocks actually takes place. So there's existing communal structures, or what we call village development committees, and for example, if these committees is being mobilized and also linked with the private financial banks, I think, and the government also puts in place with the necessary policies, I think that will also create a livestock insurance, which also be helping the pastoralists to be insured against the losses of the livestock. Exactly. So these are important ways, meaning that micro loans can be given to the pastoralist so that they can be able to revive the losses of resulted by what we call it the climate change impact, particularly the drought. The important aspect that we also look is like fostering the role of the community, meaning that empowering the local communities to employ community-driven customers and practice and locally agreed regulations. So meaning that we have to also mobilize the communities for them to come up with the local regulations that can also help them in managing the environment. I mean, like, you know, how the community can actually adapt to the climate change. In fact, in other words, in generally how the environmental stewardship that community can also put in place. So we can also look mobilizing the role of the community. And of course, we also want some of the villages in Porama, around in village under the Togdel region, the community mobilize themselves, and now they actually have their local regulations. A person who cuts the tree, a person who does ABCD, you know. So actually they're trying to have the local driven regulations to combat the environmental degradations, and in particular the deforestation, all of this, which also actually result in climate change. So this is also an important aspect to also foster the role of the community. And lastly, the study recommends that the government of Somaliland has to design and develop policy frameworks that are tailor-made to climate change adaptation needs in different sectors, meaning that the way that our policy is being formulated have to be revisited and also try to also coordinate and mainstream to different important sectors. The Somaliland authorities, in partnership with the relevant stakeholders, have to also strengthen in terms of operationalization of what we call it, in terms for operationalization of the climate change policies. We also look at the study also recommends a robust intergovernmental and multi-sectoral coordination systems must be established to effectively and systematically coordinate and mainstream the climate agendas. And number 4 is that it recommended that the special consideration has to be given to the community participation in the design and implementation of the climate policy and adaptation plans, as they are core group experiencing the climate effects. In the meantime, their potentials have to be leveraged, including the indigenous knowledge. This is also an important recommendation that we also do. At international level, we also recommend the international bodies, like international community, regulating or allocating the climate finance and support to the climate adaptation need to consider flexible, accessible, and conflict-sensitive schemes to effectively support climate resilience where it must be needed. Meaning that the way these funds are being allocated have to be very flexible, whereby, for example, like the case of Somaliland can get a space to maybe to also get engaged in terms for and to be able Somaliland to be able to also have some resource at international level that can actually help them to also that can help them in climate change adaptation initiatives. Last but not least, the pastoral sector is a central livelihood domain for Somaliland. Therefore, we should be better factored into the efforts to support the localization agenda towards strengthening the climate resilience, meaning that the issue for localization of the climate issues is very, very important. Not just looking widely, but also looking at each specific country, what are the circumstantial conditions or that this particular country has it. Somaliland, for example, when you look at Somaliland and Ethiopia, they have a different in terms of circumstances. Ethiopia is a big country, it is being recognized, and for example, in terms of the economic capacity of the Ethiopia is bigger than the Somaliland, you know. So meaning considering the local or accommodating the local circumstance of which each particular country has it. And then this will be a ways that this will also help them to thoroughly being, presented or being working on the local gaps or challenge having by each country with regards to the climate change. So thank you very much, and these are my summary. Thank you very much.